And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Really appreciate you tuning in today. It is Thursday already. It's hard to believe. This week has definitely flown by with Monday being the August long weekend holiday. We got a great show for you today lined up. Lots of discussions here on RealAg Live about agronomy today. We've got Greg Stewart. He's the agronomy lead at Maizex. He will be our guest today. If you have any questions for Greg, please ask them in the comment box, no matter if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. We want to get as many of your questions in if you have them. This is a two-way discussion, your questions and mine, and we have to share. Hey, let's bring in Greg Stewart, our guest. Hey, Greg, how are you?
Good, Shaun. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. You were just out on a video shoot with Bern Tobin, my colleague at RealAg. How'd that go?
Yeah, that was fun. We're putting those sharp edge pieces together, and they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're going to talk about one of the last episodes of Sharp Edge here in a little bit, but man, I think it's got like 6,000 views on it on YouTube. It's done a lot of interest in strip till. Very, very, very.
Yeah, kind of interesting.
Greg,
good stuff.
Yeah, for sure, man. This year has been it's been an interesting year in Ontario. Very different than 2019. That's great, by the way.
Yeah.
We were so dry. We've got some rain in some pockets, and some growers will remind me I didn't get as much as some of the other guys. It's quite varied, and we're seeing some variability in those fields. I know you've been driving around. Is the variability as big as I'm hearing from some of the growers?
Yeah, I think actually, Shaun, the variability is bigger than I was going to expect. Of walking fields and looking at populations and planting under conditions that got a bit of tough weather after planting occurred. But yeah, I think the variability is pretty big.
Yeah. So we got that rain through the weekend. There's some growers last week that made the decision because it was so dry and the fungicide decision is so tough. They decided to not apply a fungicide to protect themselves from fusarium. And then we got the rain. And now, of course, it's too late to spray. Are they going to regret that? How big of a risk situation are those growers in? Or is that am I kind of overstating the risk?
Well, there are three key questions that a grower has to struggle with when he's talking about fungicide. There's the advantages that come from the fungicide just in terms of leaf diseases and big canopies and protecting the yield from leaf diseases, right? So if a grower had drier conditions, not a huge canopy, not big leaf disease pressure, they probably made the right decision on that front to back off on the fungicide. Then there's the component that perhaps the fungicides help against stress, and so maybe some of these fields that are under stress or were under stress, maybe they could have been advantaged from a fungicide. And sort of that's maybe checkbox number 2, they don't win so big on. And then, of course, the third component is ear molds. And it's a bit of a tough animal to wrestle to the ground, to look at weather and rainfall and humidity and decide whether or not you're under risk from an ear mold infection. I think all of us struggle to get our heads around that. I would suggest that the growers that are growing corn for their own hog operations probably stayed the course and sprayed fungicide because they've got to minimize the DON levels using whatever tools they've got. And so most of those growers that are using their corn on their own hog operation probably sprayed fungicides to try to minimize ear molds and DON risk. And some of the growers that looked at the price of corn, looked at maybe they don't have a hog operation that they're worried about, that maybe they took a pass on fungicide. And I'm not sure whether it's going to come back to haunt them big. I would be a fool to try to guess where DON infection is going to end up in 2 months from now.
Yeah, no, obviously August as well is the month where people hope for some rain on those soybeans. The soybeans kind of just sit through all of June, July, and just sort of wait for August. Now we're kind of into that soybean time, right?
Yeah. Well, so for the areas that were dry and a good part of the central part of the province was pretty dry, and on to the east as well. those of us that have received, say, 2 to 3 inches of rain at the end of July, that's almost the perfect rainfall to boost soybean yields. As you know, to move into August with a 2, that's from heaven, that rain.
Greg, a few people are asking me if we color coordinated our shirts on purpose. I will state that we did not. This is totally accidental. Are you going to stick with me on the story?
Yeah, I did not. I did not ask you to wear blue today. I wear a blue shirt every day, so I'm innocent.
You're in the clear.
I'm in the clear because I'm always blue. This was clearly just the shirt that was at the top of your drawer today, Shaun.
Oh, good stuff. Okay, so Greg, we're out in our cornfields. We're walking around. We're kind of evaluating some of the decisions that we made. And some of the decisions are made. They're the best ones you can make at the time, right? And you're assessing all the risk factors when you're making some of these decisions. When it comes to agronomics, when we look at some of the yield components that make up that corn yield, and we evaluate some of those components, some of the variables that we control. This is kind of a good time to get out there and sort of do that, and most importantly, probably write some of it down so we can learn for next year.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So whether you're in an official yield tour or whether you're just out on your own or with another agronomist or another neighbor, it's a great time to get out and evaluate yield components in a cornfield. And I always like to start with the one that you'd evaluate first, which is ear count. We quite often, and especially this year, we were out counting populations. We had some stands that were not, at our classic 32, 33,000. We were out there looking at stands that, we're 26,000, we're 25,000. We're going to leave it. Wow, great information to gather for your operation to get out there and see what is your ear count now, right? And I'm always surprised when we do a yield tour across Ontario and we maybe look at 500 cornfields in the month of August. We come in with ear counts on average of about 29,500 ears per acre. And in some cases, there's some looks of dismay or shock when you tell a grower, your ear count's about 29,400 solid ears per acre, and he's expecting, 32, 33, 34. So to be able to get out there and get a handle on what your ear count is, how many stalks do you have that maybe you counted as population, but because they were late emergers or sidewall compaction or other stresses haven't generated an ear? That's critical stuff to know as you move forward and think about what are you going to do differently as you move towards planting corn next year.
Yeah, a lot of times, I think we do the evaluation, because a lot of times yield's the thing we talk about, right? It's always yield, but we can't forget about those things that led us to the yield. It's not like we kind of jump from A to Z, and there's a whole bunch of letters that make up that entire alphabet. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about looking at a cornfield and estimating its yield, it really falls into three nice components. The one we talked about first was ear count. That really, is driven by planter performance and seedbed conditions and conditions during the germination and emergence period. That's important. Then you can start looking at rows around. How much girth do your ears have? And now some of that is heavily influenced by genetics. Some hybrids, are about 16 rows around, and that's where they are. And other hybrids are maybe 18 or 20. So it's not absolutely environment or management, but it's really nice to look at that sort of that next phase. So what's the girth like on my ear? This hybrid should normally do a 16 rows around. I'm seeing a lot of 14s. Did I do something in my management? Was there some weed control that got delayed a bit? Did I have some sidewall compaction? Was my early growth as vigorous as it could be? Because those rows around are set up, sort of about V6 leaf stage. So that's an early indication of how your management might have influenced to make sure that hybrid generated the 16 or 18 or 20 rows around that it normally does. And maybe if you've really done things right and had Mother Nature on your side, you've added 2 rows to that. That is, a hybrid that's normally a 16 is showing an 18. Now you're feeling pretty good about your early management.
One of the things.
And then we come to.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go.
Good. Well, I was just going to say, and then the third phase is the length of the cob, right? What's your ear count or your row count down the length, and that's more of a, well, how did management affect later in the season? Was your nitrogen supply adequate? Obviously there's a big rainfall factor in there, so you've got to factor that in. But a yield a yield estimation really sort of nicely falls into 3 camps. What happened early in terms of ear count, what happened sort of mid-season in terms of rows around, and what happened during pollination in terms of how many kernels you got down the length of the row.
Before we started here today, you mentioned to me one of the things that you're seeing an advancement in is kernel weight. And, you go out and you do a yield estimate based on the calculation, and then you're kind of surprised, man, was something wrong with my math, but it's actually, are we underestimating kernel weight with some of these new hybrids?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Shaun. In the last 10 years, almost every time I've got a yield estimate wrong, it's not because I can't count, although some people might question that. It is really that the hybrids are putting on much more kernel weight than we're used to. And so that's been a big contributor to yield. I think particularly over the last 10 years is how much heavier our kernels are getting. And I'm not talking about test weight. I'm not necessarily talking about density. I'm talking about just the raw weight of the kernels, and that continues to grow. Our hybrids continue to make gains on that end. Better stay green, better health during the grain filling period, and better ability to pack starch into those kernels like we have not seen before, right?
Yeah. So, do you have any other research on that? Like, is it like you said, it's not density, and like is the size bigger? But like if the size isn't bigger, is it not a density thing that's creating a heavier kernel?
Yeah. So whenever I say weight to a person, they automatically think I'm talking about test weight, which really is how into a half-liter cup, right? Yeah. And the two are related. It's rare that you have good kernels that don't have pretty reasonable test weight and pretty reasonable actual weight of the individual kernel. But they're not always the same. Sometimes you can have a hybrid that will generate a big kernel. Now think, when I say big kernel now, I'm just saying the weight of that kernel, not the density of it, just the weight of that kernel. Think like 1,000 kernel weight idea, right? Yeah. So you can have a big kernel that won't necessarily give you, stellar test weight, right? But it'll give you stellar yield. If you think about doing a yield tour stop and you take all your kernel numbers and you divide it by 95,000, sort of smallish kernels, right? And then you come up with your yield number. You take that and pull that down to a 75,000 kernels to make a bushel. Wow, there's a ton of yield there that we are experiencing, I think, particularly over the last decade of genetic improvement. And the other cool thing is that there's a bit of a synergy between the genetics that are key to generating big kernels, and then you include that more fungicide use, which fungicides really, what are they going to do? They're going to contribute to late season plant health and for that hybrid to pack more weight into those kernels. And then maybe you add the idea of late nitrogen, that is more nitrogen being supplied later into the season. To me, that's sort of the trifecta: genetics, fungicide, and maybe some late nitrogen. That's making kernels like we haven't seen before in terms of weight, and that's where a lot of our yield gains are coming from, and sometimes surprising us in terms of what we think is out there when we do a kernel count versus what's there when we actually get there with the combine and the weigh wagon.
We're seeing a big U.S. corn crop estimate. I think StoneX, Arlen Suderman was on this show 2 weeks ago, and Arlen said I think he's got a 183 on the U.S. crop, which is monster. What about Ontario?
Right. I think we had a decent, I would say, sort of an average to above average crop. That we got a little bit scared during the heat and the dry weather of July in many parts that was sort of bringing us back to reality. But with the sort of the re-wetting of many of these fields, the good moisture that exists, not everywhere, but across a good chunk of the province, we're probably going to be on where guys have come backwards a little bit in their expectations. I have a feeling that we're going to be pleasantly surprised in terms of what's out there. I know I'm a bit of a seed guy, but never bet against the bag is my line. Never bet against the genetics. Never bet against a bag. And I'm sort of sitting on that line for this year as well.
You'll have to get Steve Denise to put that on the Maizex T-shirts. Never bet against the bag.
There you go.
It's the new tagline.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned the late application of nitrogen. The spoon feeding of the N throughout the growing season. Based on the conditions this year, would we have been better off, because the moisture was at the front end of the season? Would we have been better off to maybe front load some of the N in hindsight?
Yeah. So I can speak out of both sides of my mouth really well, Shaun. And so when I look at some of the late season things that are going on, I do get sort of intrigued about feeding the plant more nitrogen later, having higher N concentrations in the leaf tissue, and that translating into some bigger kernels and bigger yields. But I'm with you in the premise that if you knew that it was going to be as dry as it was, we'd have been better off to put the nitrogen down earlier, right? And when I look at lots of the U.S. Corn Belt research, that's in my mind, that's still pretty solid. You go back to the 2012 drought and look at some of the nitrogen research out of 2012. Generally, the upfront nitrogen outperformed the later nitrogen, and I think we see that in Ontario. As much as it's a beautiful concept to spoon feed nitrogen to the crop, and you could argue from an environmental perspective that's the right thing to do. I think sometimes we get caught trying to spoon feed nitrogen into a soil matrix that's dried out considerably, and it's hard to get that surface applied nitrogen or shallowly knifed in nitrogen into the crop the way you'd like it. And so, I'm not an advocate of the spoon feeding approach. I don't mind a side dress application or a later application, but I think if you talk about application costs of $15 an acre, and you think you want to go out there 2 or maybe 3 times to apply nitrogen, I'm just not sure it adds up versus a good, what I would say a fairly aggressive upfront nitrogen application in that 135 is sort of my magical number, and then try to make a smart decision end of June, middle of June as to what you need to top up with. I think that's still the most sound approach.
Yeah, I like how you break that down, Greg, in terms of don't confuse a good second application at the right time. Don't confuse that with spoon feeding. Those are two right. Different. I think that's a really, really good point you make on the difference there in the mentality. Super dry, like we talked about. Are double crop beans out this year for sure, or what are your thoughts there?
Well, we've got some ongoing interest in double crop beans. That we chatted about the sharp edge that we did, where our guy here, James Hamilton at Woodstock, used the stripper header to get the beans, or sorry, to get the wheat off a few days earlier. And this beans today do look pretty good. So I think we're still in the game. These rains have helped guys that got double crop beans in good time and have picked up this moisture. I still think we're in the game on these double crop beans, having a shot at making it, right? Nothing's ever guaranteed in the double crop world. A day or two or three can make you or break you on a double crop soybean, right?
Yeah, there's somebody watching right now from Peace River, Alberta. They're like, double crop? I'm just trying to get through one crop. I can't. So it differences for sure in geography. You mentioned that Sharp Edge video. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check out all the videos we've been doing in the Sharp Edge series with Maizex. Go to realagriculture.com. You can also find it on our YouTube channel as well. How come we don't see more strip till, Greg?
Let's not confuse stripper header, right?
Yeah.
Which is we get the same word that it's kind of funny because we did do a couple of strip till videos, and then I moved to a stripper header video. People are going to accuse me that could be my favorite word somehow. But anyway,
yeah, exactly. Be careful, Greg. Be careful.
Yeah, let's be clear as to what we're talking about. So the stripper header is almost a rarity. Like, I don't know, there might be two of them in Ontario, right?
Yeah, maybe
trying
a little
to get that weed off.
Yeah, it's like a vacuum.
Trying
Like it's sort of like it's got the teeth.
Yeah, coming up backwards to rake the wheat out of the head. And so that was sort of a cool, but sort of a one-off, or maybe there's two in the province, even though stripper headers are used around the world, I think fairly widely. On the strip till front, which of course we're now moving into a season where guys are starting to think about, okay, my wheat's off. Maybe I'm going to do some cover crop work. How am I going to fit the strip till? And I still think strip till, although I've been saying this for a long time, and our progress has been slow, but I still think strip till does offer some real nice options for getting a seed bed sort of prepped in the fall, getting some residue management done, and leaving the vast majority of the field still protected from soil, water, wind, erosion.
So why don't we see more of it though?
I think it's growing. The concern would be the classic guy that already has a good set of equipment, right? That's up to date, and he's doing a good job without moving to strip till. He looks at the strip till equipment and says, wow, that's a fairly expensive investment for doing tillage in a narrow strip. And so they're still struggling to see how that all adds up. You take a classic field in Ontario that's, let's say it's a nice lone field, well drained. And you've got two farmers side by side, and one of them is bulk spreading his fertilizer. Maybe he's getting it done custom, and it's getting done fast and accurately. And then he's hitting that field with a high quality cultivator. Everything's just right about the cultivator. He's hitting that soybean stubble with the cultivator after the fertilizer's been spread. He's done a great job of preparing a seed bed, and then he's walking in there with his 24-row planter to plant corn, right? It's hard to argue with the logistics of that system. If you compare that now to a guy who says, okay, well, I'm going to put together a strip tiller, and I'm going to put fertilizer up on top of that strip tiller, and I'm going to use that as my fertilizer spreading / tillage option, and then I'm going to come in and plant. So there's some real advantages there, but logistically, the skill of the operator, there are some hurdles from moving from that sort of let's say more tried system of broadcast the fertilizer, do a great job of making a seed bed and get in there and plant, versus maybe what's viewed as a little more complex in terms of a strip till operation and banding fertilizer into that strip, then following it with the corn planter. There's some advantages there, but it's not necessarily an easy step for a guy that's got the other system working real well for him.
I got a message here. Somebody asking for clarification. They've never seen a stripper header in soybeans. How does that all? How does that work? We see because I
Yeah, I've never,
personally I've seen it in
I've
wheat.
never seen a, yeah, I don't, I can't imagine its work. Well, okay. I've never seen a stripper header work, period, until this summer where we saw it for that first time in wheat.
Yeah,
I don't think a stripper header works in soybeans.
I
I
don't
think
think
there's
so
just,
either.
the pods are spread over much too great a distance that you wouldn't be able to stripper header soybeans. So yeah, we're just talking about stripper heading the wheat to get it off
Yeah.
in order to plant the soybeans.
Absolutely, yeah. Because you need all of what you're trying to get at the top, and it basically just comes in and just sort of like, and you're left with a whole bunch of trash. So it's used a lot in like in real. We see it. There's a few people here around here that use them, and they're for like they're for the super soil conservation people, where they want as much trash on that
Right
field
on.
as possible. So
Yeah, go.
what else did I talk to you about? Oh, cover crops. I don't know if we can ever have a conversation around here without talking about cover crops. It's that time of the year.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's motherhood, apple pie, and cover crops, right? There's got to be a fit. There's got to be a fit for cover crops somehow in your operation. But I always get a little bit anxious about some of the stuff I see on cover crop research, right?
Yeah.
For example, our classic cover crop in Ontario was red clover. I mean, I'm showing my age, but essentially that was it,
Just to
right?
help you out, Greg
And
Johnson is still on that bandwagon. He was on RealAg Radio
yeah,
on
yeah,
Monday, and we talked about it. So just it's you're okay.
yeah, yeah. So I'm old. Johnson is old and stubborn. But at any rate, so I'll pick on that idea just a little bit. In the red clover world, although we had some problems getting the red clover to be a uniform stand across the field, which is a significant problem, in our research in red clover, which was pretty exhaustive, we could count on a 50 to 70 pound of nitrogen credit to next year's corn crop. I mean, if you had a decent stand of red clover, you could mail it in that you had 50 to 70 pounds of nitrogen that you could put against the corn crop trends that exist now, whether they're summer seeded, whether they're sort of an oilseed radish base or oats or peas or multi-species mixtures. My experience in that and what I've seen in the data is that those summer seeded cover crops, even though in some cases do get a fair bit of nitrogen sequestered into the above ground part of the plant, particularly if you've got manure involved, that relay of nitrogen into next year's corn crop is just nowhere near as reliable as what it was with something like a red clover or crimson clover or alfalfa, some of those more traditional crops that we investigated from a cover or from a nitrogen relay perspective. So I think there's real value in cover crops, but in my experience, getting that big nitrogen credit out of a summer seeded cover crop is really a long shot.
So we still have a lot of research to do. And like I ask people all the time, what are you using for your cover crop? And I'm starting to think the answer is whatever cover crop you use, because there's a lot of opinions on this one, and a lot more research to be done.
Yeah, I think you're right on there. There's still lots of questions. I mean, I alluded to the idea of multi-species cover crop. I don't know whether I've been to a meeting in my life where I've really seen a definitive advantage to like a 10 species, 15 species cover crops over a straight oats, pea, oilseed radish type approach. Maybe there are some advantages to some blending. I used to think about the approach of, well, if I made a 2 or 3 way mix in a cover crop, I'd have something that dies pretty early on the first frost, something that takes a little more frost to take it out, and something that maybe has the potential of overwintering. So I think there are some species blending options, but lots of research in terms of what the advantages of really tackling multi-species are. And I personally have not seen much data to support the advantages of the big species mixtures.
Yeah, for sure. What else are you hearing out in the countryside, Greg? What else is on growers' minds that you're hearing a lot about that we should probably address to get out to the masses?
Yeah, so the one thing that I think is worth noting is we planted corn pretty early, right? We had a lot of our corn in early. By the 31st of July, there was a lot of fields that were completely done pollination, right? And so it's always a critical reminder for guys that are in the silage game to not miss the silage window, right? And the quality of that silage is so critical to maximizing milk production that we're going to have to be on our toes, particularly, well, depending a little bit on what August weather brings us. But we've had some years where silage harvest, no one thought about silage harvest till the 25th of September. And so we're going to have to be pretty careful that this year we don't miss silage windows in terms of the right moisture to get that silage harvested and fermented in top condition, because we are earlier than we have been for some time.
That's a great reminder. Just don't follow the calendar. Get out in your fields and do some scouting and make sure you pay attention. That's a really, really good point.
Just a terrible, a terrible waste of effort to have a beautiful silage crop there and not be attentive that, geez, maybe even though it is only the 20th of August, I better be out there checking milk line and seeing where that crop's at.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Greg, really appreciate you joining us here today on RealAg Live. A lot of fun, some great insight. Really appreciate it. And if somebody wants more information on Maizex, how do they find you?
Yeah, so you can go to our Maizex.com, and pretty easy to find us if you just go to the Maizex.com website, or my email is just greg@Maizex.com.
Okay, Greg, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, keep wearing that blue shirt, eh?
Yeah. Oh, the chances of it, I tell you. Hey, it was a lot of fun today on RealAg Live. I really appreciate everybody joining us here today. Next week, I think I'm off. We may have a show on Tuesday. It's a possibility. For sure not Wednesday, Thursday, because guess what? I'm going on holidays. So there'll be no RealAg Live at the back end of next week. Today on RealAg Radio, on Rural Radio 147, it's Thursday, which means it's a Farmer Rapid Fire. We got farmers from across the country that'll be we'll be checking in with, find out what's going on in their fields and their barns. Love the Farmer Rapid Fires. And then tomorrow on RealAg Radio, of course, it's a RealAg Issues panel. Lindsay Smith, Andrew Campbell, and Jeff English. Thank you very much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with real agriculture. And we'll talk to you again soon. Cheers, everyone.